Welcome to the Love Truth Leadership Podcast. I appreciate your patience as we bring you this special episode, a bit later than promised. Today it's just me here as Larry sends his best wishes. We're honored to have John England joining us. He's not just a former district attorney, he's a visionary in the realm of criminal justice, passionately advocating for a shift from incarceration to rehabilitation. His rich experience and deep commitment to transformative justice are set to enlighten and inspire us all. So let's settle in for what promises to be a truly engaging and insightful conversation. Podcast. I'm your host, Nick. Sadly, Larry's not going to join us today, but he sends his best and has left some great questions for our very esteemed guest that we have today. I'm very excited, actually, to bring John on. I've known him and admired John for a very long time. I mean, shoot, John, I met you at the bike shop, probably going on like 13 years ago almost, right?
Yeah. It's been a long time. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's for sure. We used to ride together all the time. Right now he's traveling in a van, so I don't get to spend as much time with him as I used to. But his most recent professional chapter was at England Law, where his advocacy in criminal and civil matters were nothing short of exemplary. This followed a remarkable tenure in public service, where he made substantial contributions to the legal field. As a district attorney in the 21st Judicial District Attorney's Office in Grand Junction, Colorado, John adeptly managed a diverse criminal docket. Including juvenile cases, his work encompassed a wide range of legal responsibilities, from prosecuting serious cases to conducting detailed legal research and trials. His versatility extends beyond the courtroom into the healthcare sector, where he provided vital consultation and leadership as a CEO and corporate counsel for Plum Creek Medical. And he's a graduate of Crichton University of School of Law. His dedication to community service is inspiring, and his professional achievements with contributions to organizations like the Food Bank of the Rockies, the Colorado Caucus System, and the Hope Center in Omaha, Nebraska. So today we're going to dive into his extensive experience and his forward-thinking approach to the criminal justice system, particularly his advocacy for rehabilitation over incarceration. John, it's an honor, my man. I welcome you as a mentor and a friend to the Love Truth Leadership Podcast. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, and I really am excited to be here. I've listened to some of your podcasts and really enjoy the topics that you and Larry, speak about, and the relationship you guys have, because it's truly just kind of inspirational. And I think it provides a real, service to those out there that are kind of looking for that same thing and that need in their lives. So yeah, it's just great to, talk to you and hang out with you and, in this capacity. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you being on, my man. I was sitting there, I was trying to think about okay, what topic do we tackle next? And Larry and I have a project that we're working on where we're trying to get in youth groups kind of thing. I'm doing a little bit of a side podcast. It's going to be like once a month type of special show where we bring on a bunch of young kids and just talk to them about their struggles that they're having with mental health and trying to tackle this issue, early on. And especially for young men, because I feel like a lot of young men have a lot of struggles being able to be open about their issues and problems and that kind of stuff, right? And just trying to teach them a way to, balance life and at the same time balance, a good mental aspect towards life. So that's going to be something that's coming up in the future. Actually, before this episode, The first, when it's the periodical episode is called the Round Table, and I actually already have one of those recorded, so that'll be coming out before this episode comes out. So I'm going to get right into it, John. So in your career as a district attorney, did you encounter any specific mental health disorders more frequently among offenders, and how did this impact your approach to their prosecution and or rehabilitation?
Yeah, I think mental health was a component in a number of cases, and that can range from significance to like the insanity, where people are probably familiar with kind of the insanity defense. He's not guilty by reason of insanity, but that's a very high bar. So
yeah,
in order to get over that, you have to show not only that the person kind of didn't know what they're doing, but they can't even understand right from wrong. And so it rarely comes up, and mainly only comes up in those big like cases as far as the crime is so egregious. I think the Aurora shooter, they tried that defense there, and the jury was like, no, that's
right,
not what is going on here. But I had that come up. Like I had a couple times where the person was in a ward of the state, and so they're in a facility, and say they assault their caretaker, and that would come up, and the caretaker's like, they and you're dealing with victims, and they're like, hey, I was assaulted severely. I've worked with this person for a long period of time. They clearly know right from wrong and that. And so you're trying to kind of figure out, does the person know this? What can we do? What other, services or ways can we make this right? And that's what you're often balancing. It's like the victim, kind of, having justice, having, taking, hearing what they had to say, versus, like, how do we help this person that's already kind of a ward of the state and that. And so that's kind of the only time that I really saw that. And I don't know all the specific diagnoses that they suffer from, but it's kind of the far reaching. One of the other things that comes up quite a bit is whether the person is competent to proceed to trial. And so I, worked as a defense attorney. And so you're working with the individual. And sometimes I wasn't sure the person really understood. So what you're looking at there is, does the person understand where they're at, the potential penalties? Can they have a conversation with you to kind of strategize for defense? And there were certain times when I would work with my clients, like, I just don't know. And then those cases, the court will bring in somebody to evaluate that person.
Yeah.
But I think for today, kind of what we're going to talk about more is just kind of that, the mental health aspect as a component of rehabilitation. And so those you'd see ranges of everything. You got kind of some manias, psychosis, schizophrenias. And then, kind of the biggest thing that you see is like drug substance and alcohol use. And
so like for people looking for an escape, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's one of those things where, they're trying to escape this situation that they're in. So they, refer to substances to help them, either have a better time or to help them alleviate stress or whatever it is. Right. And then those substances lead to a never-ending cycle of falling downhill, basically.
No, definitely. Yeah, like that self-medication. And oftentimes they just don't have either the resources, the understanding of what is needed. And so, they're using that substance to kind of get an escape or to kind of, deal with the situation. And so for me, drug use, I took a recent psychology class, and they categorize it, as mental health. But for me, it always seems like it's kind of more than that. It is, and it's got something additional. And so, that was one of the bigger ones that I saw, is that. And then you have kind of more of, like lesser, like, things that, you have people come in, they're completely, don't know where they're at and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
But that was pretty minimal. But then there was also just kind of that day-to-day, thing that where it is. It's in rehabilitation. I think we'll talk about it more in that, but I think mental health is a huge component of that. It's just helping somebody to, deal with that, deal with the substance issue, deal with that. And so, for me, what I always tried to kind of have is at least like incarceration as a last resort. And
which is what I appreciate about you a lot, my man, is the fact that you're like, all right, let's figure out how we can get you into something that's going to improve yourself, right? Rather than like, all right, cool, going to jail,
Yeah. And that was, I think, Colorado, I think in general has started to move that direction. And you take the area of DUIs, and they have in Colorado, a fourth DUI can be classified as a felony.
Yeah.
But there's specific legislation that says you have to exhaust essentially all rehabilitation before you can incarcerate somebody in Department of Corrections. And so I think there's a lot of legislation kind of moving that way that kind of also encourages that. But then you get, particular, say, DA's offices where they want to, put people in jail because, it's easier for the most part. You don't have to deal with it. You don't have to deal with somebody violating their probation and coming back. It's just done. And it's kind of, we're cleaning up the streets. There's sometimes that kind of, I guess, I don't know, thought process. But for me, it was always, if there was something I could do to help the person through rehabilitation, get some additional services. And so I oftentimes would work with the defense attorneys, like what does this person need so that not only is the community safe, but that this person could get help and get the services they need so that in the long run, we're not seeing that person come back. And
you're trying to break the cycle, right? Where you put a person into jail. And I've seen it with like close personal friends, and they become institutionalized, and it's something that they're completely comfortable with and that kind of thing. And then living the outside life at that point in time becomes too big for them to try to tackle. So they just go break another law to get, thrown back into jail again or prison. Yeah. And did you see like a lot of lack of purpose in these people as well? Not having like a bigger goal in their life?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was kind of what I wrestled with a lot in the courtroom, is I'd see a lot of these guys come through the courtroom and they come over and over, and we'd get different resources. I'd get some mental health resources, we get drug resources, we get different things. And like, that was what I'd wrestle with. And I'd meet some of these guys in the community, and they'd recognize me, and I think most DAs wouldn't talk to them. But, for me, I became an attorney because I wanted to help people. I had, you and I talked about this kind of before the show, is that, I've been kind of in the system a little bit, had my run-ins with the criminal justice system. And, what was it that kind of helped me? And it's like what you have with Larry, somebody kind of walking alongside them, walking alongside me. For me, it was having a purpose. You've mentioned Viktor Frankl in some of your prior episodes. It's like what he talks about is having that infinite spiritual reference point, something beyond yourself. And so there's this one young man that I've been probably mentoring for about 4 years. And so, I think sometimes we're like, hey, the person's going to turn around instantly, but it's never like a quick turnaround.
I'm struggling with I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, he had just gotten out. He got in trouble again. So he was getting out of jail. And I'm like, oh man, I don't have anywhere. And so I got my Sprinter van. And so I set up this hammock, and I was like, okay, what do we do to get a bigger vision for your life? And so we're like hiking 14ers. We're doing this stuff because it's like, how do you break that identity that somebody who's been essentially been in the system since they're 14, something like that, to current age of like 22, 23. How do you see a bigger vision for yourself? And so that was really something I wrestled with and wanted to at least like try and see if there's a way to like find that for an individual.
The word you used was identity, right? They identify as this, which is that's the hardest thing to break. Is like, I grew up living in this scenario, so this is my identity. This is who I am. And it's easy for me to go and do these things that might cause me to get in trouble because it's who I am. And that's something that I feel like is really huge. What misconceptions do you think the public or the criminal justice system holds about offenders with mental health issues?
I think it's kind of different from everybody's point of view. So if you kind of look at the victim's point of view, when I would work with victims, it's like kind of, if I had explained to him what the defense attorney had provided me about what this person suffers with, it's like, sometimes it'd be like, well, is the person just going to get away with it? Like, why is there not justice for me? I was the one that was hurt. And so we need, and then oftentimes, depending on the victim, is like, they need to be punished so that it deters them. Well, not always, doesn't always a deterrent, just having punishment or having incarceration. So for me as a district attorney, how I'd approach it is just, try and be open. I think some of the other district attorneys would, and kind of set the stage. It's like, hey, this is what I see going on here. These are the options that we tend to have is probation, which would, allow this individual to get some treatment in both, say, drug use and, some therapy and things like that. So that this doesn't happen to other people in the future. Obviously, we have incarceration, and then just kind of walk through so that, I think sometimes the expectation is like, well, we'll do whatever the victim wants. And I don't think as a DA, that's what the job is. And there's, that's kind of what it spells out a lot of times, is that's not really the DA, the district attorney, the prosecutor is supposed to seek justice, not necessarily just incarcerate people.
Yeah, and that's fair. But I mean, you got to also understand the victim, in those scenarios, they have a right too, right? To want to seek that as well, which I mean, I totally get. I mean, I understand that, but that's where, us as victims maybe need to have a little bit more compassion towards the person that and look at where their scenario was. Maybe everything's going to be different. That's why our law system is so intricate, right? Is because we have all these different scenarios that go on for for the same law that's broken in many different ways, right?
Yeah, and you look at the criminal history. So this is a first-time offender versus that. But there's a lot of, from the defendant's side, I think oftentimes there's a huge mistrust.
Oh, yeah.
Especially somebody who's been in the system for a long time. It's like, I don't want to tell you about what's going on mentally because I don't want it to be hammered against me. Anytime they've come into contact with the system, it's been a punishment. It's been bad. It's been something like that. And they don't oftentimes want the stigma. It's like, hey, if I come out and I'm this, then I'm going to be stigmatized as somebody who suffers from this or isn't normal. And so, there's all these things. And I think, looking at that is for the thing that I worked on, what we tried to do in the 21st Judicial District. It was the only judicial district in Colorado that didn't have a treatment court. So every other, judicial district. So I sat on a board out there to try and get that in grand judge, and it was tough because I don't know if they're just ingrained. A lot of the court didn't think that it was needed. And so we're sitting there thinking, for me, I'm like, hey, this is, and like the ones that were proponents of it, it's like, we need something like this because it's a huge way of keeping not only costs down, but helping individuals actually walk out of the system.
Yeah.
And what I saw is this idea of like, it wasn't just substances. What we were trying to do is like a full, like a treatment court where we'd almost have somebody like kind of would walk with the individual through getting out of the system. So they may not have the ability to take their kids to daycare or that, or, just even the simplest tasks that we may take, on a daily basis, like, oh, that's not that big a deal. It's like, it's very difficult for them to do that because they don't have the resources. So it's like, if you can get them to that, like they can't get to that next step, is like finding a treatment court or way of, doing kind of walking with them through the process is kind of where I and the rest of the individuals on the treatment court were trying to work through that so that they, could get the resources and the treatment that they needed.
So that's basically those were some of the initiatives that you took as far as like in the 21st district, was to try to provide that, that rehabilitation program for them, basically.
Yeah, we were trying to get a treatment court in that judicial district because, like I said, it's the only one that doesn't have it in Colorado. And so there's a lot of different treatment courts in Colorado. There's DUI courts for individuals that continue to get DUIs. There's substance, drug courts, kind of essentially, and then there's mental health courts. We were trying to do almost like an amalgamation where it's just a little bit of everything, but it was essentially somebody who would walk with the individual to kind of get to these resources and essentially a little bit mentor, but a little bit just like helping coordinate everything.
Yeah, 100%.
So like a client coordinator or something like that. Yeah.
Because I can speak from this personally, actually, because I remember whenever I got my, and this may seem, insignificant to a lot of people, but I got my 5th driving on a suspended license. So and you go through, I went through life, breaking all kinds of laws and had a bunch of sentences that were deferred, but that's only on your employment record whenever they get deferred, right? It's not in the criminal record. And so I remember the judge specifically, she's like, Nick, you've been a criminal since you were 16. And she's all like, so, and you've managed to, escape punishment a lot for a lot of this stuff. So I'm throwing the book at you. You're a habitual offender. I'm charging you with a felony and this and that. And I ended up like pleading with her, ended up getting that deferred. And she wanted to put me in jail for 9 months, give me the max sentence that she could give me. And I pled with her. And was like, please just let me have house arrest, or something, or work release or something, and she ended up, did give me, and it was almost my saving grace, right? Just having a little bit of this compassion found in this judge, but she ended up giving me 18 months of house arrest, and I lost my license for like 2.5 years. And I mean, when looking back on it, I'm so grateful that I had that ability to escape that in that way, basically. Or that I found that compassion in that person, because, I would have lost my job. I would have had a mad life reset, would have came out, probably in worse for wear than going in, spending that amount of time in the jail system. And so I was lucky enough, and I count my blessing there for sure. To be where like, okay, cool. Thank you for letting me, escape this process for sure. And, so it's one of those things where looking back now, I mean, in the punishment, I'm like, man, this sucks. But looking back now, it's like, man, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to, I lost my license. So I didn't, I wouldn't have been able to ride bikes, because that was my only transportation, was riding a bike to and from work. And then getting into the bike shop. So that, while it was bad at the time, that springboarded my whole life transition basically into living this positive, a little bit more of a positive lifestyle.
There's like that kind of that balance between, consequences or, standards and compassion. It's like, if you give only one or only the other, you can err on either side. But it seemed like the judge still had those standards with you, but also showed you that compassion that let you know, like, okay, they are going to give me that shot. There is, somebody that's kind of rooting for you. And that's a lot of the thing with treatment courts. It's like you have like where individuals come back into the courtroom and the court's like, hey, you're doing a great job. There's other people in there. They're like also going through the same thing. So you're kind of walking through it together. You're not just kind of like a number in the system. It's like, I go serve your probation term. It's like individuals kind of coming together to like work through this process and kind of succeed together. So,
that's huge. Awesome. It is huge. And now that I think about it, I'm actually going to try to find out who that judge was and write her a letter of thanks. That's not, because, pay some of my gratitude forward to her, because without that little bit of leniency towards my part, it would have been, I wouldn't like to see where my life would be at right now, basically.
I'm sure she'd love to hear it, because I'm sure judges don't ever get the positive for the most part. I mean, even as a prosecutor, I was like, all the time you'd be convicting individuals. I remember this one guy who came in and he couldn't qualify for the public defender, so he came and talked to me directly. And I ran into him later. He's like, I just wanted to thank you. You really changed my life. It was kind of similar situation, was messing up on probation, struggling with substances. Like, hey, you've had all these opportunities. It's either you do this, or I got to put you in prison, or I got to ask for that at least. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. And like, you never see somebody, but I happen to see this one guy, and it has an impact, because you don't necessarily see that as a judge or from the prosecutor's point of view. So I think that'd be awesome.
So how do you balance the need for accountability and actions with understanding of mental health influences? And now I want to clear something up real quick, because whenever I'm talking mental health, I'm not talking just, let me think about this for a sec, because mental health is such a big subject, and it doesn't have to say where there's like a clinical diagnosis, right? It can be just like, my life feels off and I have a hard time thinking about positive things to do, or I don't feel positively about myself. So it's easy for me to, not put value in my actions. It's such a big deal. That's where, mental health can be as small as I don't have a good routine, or as big as I definitely have some kind of issue and I need to be on medication, and even further than that, to up to insanity. So
Yeah.
like, how do you balance the need for accountability in criminal actions with the understanding that people don't, have the accurate mental health?
Yeah. And I think what you're saying, is true. And I think the more studies that we're seeing come out is like, there's more and more of the population that struggles with, let's say, anxiety. And so oftentimes those that are in custody or in the criminal justice system, the percentage may be higher. Doesn't necessarily mean somebody doesn't know right from wrong, isn't accountable. Doesn't mean that they can't make payments back to society, back to the victim. And so you're trying, at least for me, I would look at those situations and kind of see what is the capacity of this person. I found in my particular position, the defense attorneys tended to trust, I guess, me, because if they gave me information like this, I wouldn't hold it against them, kind of thing. Because there's always that strategy in the courtroom. You want to win the trial, but so you have to balance that whole thing. But it's like, how do you hold this person accountable? And there can be simple things as like writing letters. I saw that a lot on the juvenile court when he'd work with young kids, and there's like, hey, that's a big thing. It's like, hey, can you write a letter to the victim? Can you apologize? Can you do this? Try and set those standards of what would have been, it's okay to make mistakes from time to time, but how do you account for that? How do you make it right in this situation? And then you got to balance that community safety aspect. It's like, is the person, if you don't put them, in custody, in jail or whatnot, how do you ensure that community's not going to be in danger?
Exactly.
But there's also that balance of, if it goes on untreated, how is it also continuing to contribute to their criminal behavior? Because just because somebody suffers with mental health doesn't, like that, the mental health aspect is kind of separate from the criminal behavior.
Yeah.
But if, something that you want to, as part of a full rehabilitation to help somebody walk out of like criminal behavior, is where you want to address all the issues, whether that's, some kind of underlying mental health issue, some kind of substance issue. And for what I saw a lot was, the substance and the mental health were correlated. Not necessarily like if you use substances, you definitely have mental health, or mental health means that you're going to use. But there was a correlation. And in healthcare, I saw this as well, is that, our provider, one of them, did a lot with mental health and bipolar and schizophrenia, depression, anxiety. And he would have his patients sign contracts and he'd do drug screens on it. He's like, you won't be able to feel the benefits of the prescribed medications unless you walk out of, your substance use as well. And we can treat this. And so I think a lot of these rehabilitation programs and what you're looking for balancing community safety is like coming at it from a multi-dimensional approach, like every aspect of what it means to be human.
Oh yeah, it's
and
huge.
Mental health is a big component of that.
It's a huge component of that. And it's, I think whenever you're talking, I'm sitting there thinking about myself, not myself, but it's like people that don't maintain value in what their life can be, or what service they can provide other people and stuff like that. And it's like, all they have to do is like be self-serving and do what it takes to be self-serving. Right. So they sit there and like, okay, cool. It's nothing for me to, make somebody a victim, break a law and that kind of stuff. So that's what.
And oftentimes I think one of the things,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you're up.
We may not discuss a huge amount today because I think we're focused from the defense side, but I think the statistics are that those that suffer from mental health issues oftentimes are victims of crimes. And so, how do you work through that situation and ensure that, like from the prosecution side is like, also, are we working with the victim to help them get the resources they need? And that actually, the Victims' Rights Act came into effect when President Reagan got shot. And he goes through the process. He's like, nobody really reached out to me or talked to me. He's like, I think that our country needs to have meaningful conversations with victims. And so he put that into law because he experienced it. And so trying to balance all those things is really difficult. And there's obviously no one answer fits all, but it's just, weighing all these different things, and, community safety versus rehabilitation versus, what are we looking at in the future? What can we do? And people's rights, like to incarcerate somebody takes away their rights. They no longer have, their right, for freedom and all these things. And so it's something that, as a prosecutor kind of weighed heavily on me.
No joke.
In everything that I did.
And then you got to also think about like you said, from the victim standpoint, okay, so the victim now doesn't have the correct mental health because of this issue that they went through with somebody who committed a crime against them, but they don't, they're not sitting there going to go out and, repeat the process, right? So it boils down to like a level of morality as well, right? So you break one small law and it's like, okay, cool, that was nothing. I didn't get caught. I didn't get the trouble that I got into wasn't that big a deal. So my next moral step is my next moral break, I should say, is easier to do, and then, okay, cool, I did that. And now my moral compass just keeps getting more and more askew. And you stop thinking about your actions or your behaviors affecting other people. And so it's just like, once you start this whole process, it just becomes easier and easier and easier to keep going morally downhill, so it's a huge thing, and it's crazy. So like, from your experience though, what is there any changes to legislation that you would recommend to better support the rehabilitation of offenders with mental health issues, or maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a huge topic. And like I said, I think Colorado is starting to take a better look. They've been taking a look for a period of time. We're seeing more rehabilitation courts, more mental health courts, more substance drug courts, those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's kind of go back to what we touched on a little earlier. Is just, how do we walk with somebody that we truly are wanting to rehabilitate?
Yeah.
Because there's so much, like, when somebody gets out of jail and they're like, okay, you got to go do these things. It's like, there's a huge list. And if you're just on probation, I mean, the probation officer isn't doing it for you. They're like, hey, go do these things. And so it can be overwhelming. Like I said, that young man that had gotten, out of jail and he, got on a probation sentence. I was walking with him through it and like doing it and like, yeah, okay, so this is what we got to do. We got to go over here and sign up for this. And if you take away, say you don't have a license or a car, or then it just compounds. Well, everything takes longer. So either you're driving without a license, or you're, doing something that, or you're taking, twice as long to take the bus, 3 times as long. And so I think for me is like having somebody that can kind of coordinate, that like those resources for somebody, rather than just kind of getting a packet. That's like, hey, these are the things you need to do. Here, you can go try and get this help here. Because there's so much that somebody has to do. And I think I've heard you and Larry talk about it before. It's like, and I think a lot of guys get out like, okay, I'm going to make a huge change now. And they try and bite off more than they can chew.
Yeah,
so
for real.
Of making that 10% change every day, they're trying to do 120% change every day. And it's like, as people get overwhelmed and then fall back into what they know. And so, I think for me, it's just, I think a lot of times we have the resources, but just being able to coordinate them, being able to figure out, how does this work? And then, like I said, for me, like it's that the one that either doesn't or can't be part of the courtroom is having that kind of that higher power kind of thing. It's what does that look like in your life? Because oftentimes the court can't do that. The court can't tell you, what's going to be the meaning in your life. But, what does that look like? So I think that we're moving in the right direction. I think, mental health is actually on the radar in a lot of courtrooms, and on the radar of the legislator. What that looks like, played out, I don't know. For me, it's just kind of having that aspect of, how do we walk individuals through this so that they make sure that they're taking advantage of those resources? Exactly.
People finding a purpose that's positive for their lifestyle and something that has a positive effect on other people. I mean, it can be, there's something this subject is a lot bigger than what it really is, and what we're, covering in just this podcast episode. I mean, it's huge in comparison to what it really is. And it's one of those things where, I think it starts, from whenever a lot of people are developing as teenagers, not having the right support network or being able to address the issues that they see going on in their lives. And next thing you know, they're like, okay, cool. Well, I don't feel like I'm cared about, and stuff like that too. It's something that is just gigantic. And the way we need to look at it is it's not just an improvement for the individual either. It's an improvement for society overall as well. Yeah. It's not, and that's where I really, if you're having a hard time finding that big, higher power, the spiritualness of it all, think about the effect that it's going to have on your fellow man, and how much life is going to be better for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think it is. It's just something, to try and find that. And like you said earlier, it's like there's not one size fits all. It's what that you have to be able to, and that's what gets hard in the criminal justice system. Is it moves very slow. It's it's hard to really tailor everything. There's a lot of cases, and as a prosecutor, I try to do is tailor that sentence too. And I know the judges do as well. But if I was going to give somebody a chance, it's like, okay, this person's been arrested, 7 times and, is on probation for, 3 felonies. It's like, and you want me to give them another chance on probation. Well, what are we going to do? And so I've had people say, I will stay in custody until I can go directly into rehab, whether that's 6 months, a year, whatever it is. I'm like, okay, this person's serious. This person's serious about getting the help that they need. And so, okay, I would love to work with this person. And I see it work a lot of times. It's like, tailoring it so that the individual gets the specific help they need.
Do you think that the current prison environments are conducive to addressing mental health issues? And if not, what changes would you suggest?
No, I mean the prison system. There are resources there. I'm not super familiar with all the things that are available. I think there are resources. Yeah. I think it's what you talked about earlier, is like having that identity. By the time you get there, I think either you oftentimes you have this mental picture of yourself, this identity that this is who I am. Yeah. This is what this is all I'm going to know for my life. And so I'm just going to bracket it out until I get out again. Yeah. And so, I think that there are some resources in there. I think a lot of guys just don't take advantage of them because, like what you're saying is like, they don't have maybe a bigger vision for their life and that. And I think there are some guys that do, like I'm mentoring a guy right now that's in DOC, and we talk about it, and, we talk, what is he doing, this, and he is. And part of what I try and do is just encourage him. Keep doing that. Let's talk about this, and just kind of walk with him through that until he does, get out on parole. And I think there's definitely can be more. I don't really know what the best, like I said, I haven't done a huge amount actually in the prison system.
No, that's a loaded question too, though. I mean, right? I mean, for sure. I definitely handed you a loaded one there because it's one of those things where it's like we discussed earlier. Once you go in, then you identify as a prisoner, and that becomes your identity. And then, okay, well, I'm already in jail and this and that, and then just living on the outside becomes hard and all that kind of stuff, and just being that's where we like in our episode Purpose and Meaning, to find that purpose or meaning in your life, you really have to challenge your identity and who you identify as, and that's a big deal. So looking forward, are your hopes for the future of criminal justice in relation to mental health and rehabilitation? What are they? What are your hopes for the future of it?
So for rehabilitation, I hope that it almost starts to come to like, it's a day in, day out at the job. Like if you're a prosecutor, it's like, you've seen everything and you've seen everybody say, I'm going to change, and they don't. Yeah. From the defense side, it's like, you see the same thing. Yeah. And so it's a really tough situation, tough area to kind of work in, and not a lot of people say just kind of lose kind of, any kind of hope that somebody's going to kind of change or walk out of the system. And so for me, it's like, I actually have taken a step back from, full-time practice of law to look at what that looks like. Because like I said, I would see these individuals come through the courtroom and it's like, what can I do? And I started befriending them and working with these guys that were what they call a halfway house or community corrections, what it's called in Colorado, and just kind of be that person to kind of mentor somebody and have that understanding. And, it was tough. Like that one young man, like he told me it was probably a year in that he mentioned, oh, by the way, you were the prosecutor on my case. And he didn't tell me. I wasn't the one that sentenced him, or otherwise I probably would have remembered him. But, so he was very guarded because like, you don't trust people in law enforcement if you're raised in a situation where, you don't trust law enforcement. And this young man has never had a positive role model in his life. His uncle get out of prison, have him moving drugs and guns and all these things. And, just a situation that I didn't grow up in. And it's been etched into, like, as I saw, like on the juvenile docket, these kids is just they're living in environments that's it's etched into them. And so what does it take to walk with somebody out of that, identity, out of that lifestyle, out of, where they are, to give them a vision for their life? And
exactly.
So, you talked about that meaning and purpose, and I listened to that episode, and, one of the things, at least for me, that I found when I was in those situations is kind of rings true with the Apostle John says, is like, in the beginning was the Logos, the reason for life. The reason for life was with God. And the reason for life was God. And so all these people, the Greeks were looking at like, what is it? Can we find this philosophical principle? Can we find that? The Apostle John says, this is it. This is who it is. It's God incarnate that came down. And so that's what helped me to have this bigger vision for my life. That's something beyond me. Like Viktor Frankl says, that infinite spiritual reference point captured me. And some of the stuff, that wasn't an immediate change. And that's what I see with some of these guys that, my hope is like, hey, let's do this. And then you'll be, a law-abiding citizen in 6 to 10 months. And you're like, well, no, it takes a lot longer. So can we walk with these individuals through this process? And it goes back to that DOC. If somebody, I had this young man, he went to prison early, like at age 21, 20, something like that. And you could see it in the courtroom. That was his identity. And like I tried every aspect I could get. He was staying with people that, I happened to know, and they would call me, and like, it was just, I was wrestling with it as a prosecutor. And I remember when the judge sentenced him, she was like, everybody in this room is working harder for your success than you are. And I know that's harsh, but I think he like, it was hard because I was like, he's just identified as this, and, his dad was working with him, like everybody was. And, how does that young man get a vision for his life that can break him out of that? And that's what, while I kind of took this step back right now and kind of focused on that theology as I'm getting my master's in theology, it's like, what is it? What is missing from just the rehabilitation side of just therapy or just substance abuse treatment or just potential punishment? Is there something that we can do and put into this system that might help draw somebody out of that and say, hey, I do have a vision for my life. My identity can be found in something else.
Exactly. And I mean,
that's kind of what I'm looking at.
It can be, and it's a lot to do with, the upbringing, what school system they go to, how they feel about themselves while they're being taught things, like, okay, so I'm not smart enough to learn this subject at school, so I'm just not good enough. And then, it's the issue is relatively gigantic. When it all comes down to it, is like, how can we prepare all these young people to live a life of purpose and to live a life that's beneficial towards our society, and stuff like that. And it boils down to so many different factors: the house they're raised in, the schooling system that they go to, how they feel about themselves in the schooling system, whether they're taught they're taught to fit in a box, or taught their skills, something that they're found to be exemplary in. Let's teach them that, rather than just being, no, you have to do the current math problem that everybody is learning in the same box, So there's so many changes that need to happen to really incorporate this whole thing. But Larry and I sit here and talk about these kind of issues all the time, and we talk for hours and hours and hours about how all of these certain factors of our society need this giant change to incorporate a better outcome for everyone. So I'm going to move into a few of Larry's questions that he sent for you.
Sure.
What events have happened that have had a profound effect on your life?
For me personally, or how?
Yeah, just for you personally.
And I think I shared a little bit of that as well, is that I got in trouble when I was younger, and
Yeah.
I kind of started taking on that identity. I wrestled. I would get in trouble, be wrestling with it as, having to go to court or whatnot. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to change. I'm going to make these steps, and I'm going to change the direction of what I'm going. And I just kept falling down, and I was like, what do I do? And that's why I say, for me, it was having that where I felt like, an encounter with God, where I felt like God came and got me.
Heck yeah.
And so that was a big one for me. Is just like, there's certain times, at least in my life, that I feel like I've seen that there has to be something beyond what I can really grasp, in this life. And so that was, I think, the biggest thing for me, is what it did. And it kind of, I think, changed the way I viewed and approached things in the courtroom, because, as a prosecutor, oftentimes, like, you hear the other prosecutors, oh, these guys are just criminals, let's lock them up, let's do this. It's kind of that, and they have a job to do, and that's their job. It's just like, but there's this vision of it. And then, the judges are kind of too, like, they have a, like, hey, and it's almost like everybody's kind of looking at this one person as like they're less than. And then I became a defense attorney, and I remember one of the defense attorneys goes, none of these guys are really worth your bar card. They're worth your license to practice. And she was kind of protecting me because I'm a nice guy and, might get over involved and whatnot. But I think, I kind of envisioned them looking at them in a different way, but it was like, I just like approaching the job as like, but for the grace of God, go I. It's like, I could just as easily be me in that situation. And the way I know that is because I sat there. I've walked in this person's shoes. And so like, what can I do to like help this individual? And so I feel like in my life, like, God's used the experiences, my failures, my flaws, my mistakes, in a way that I could go help somebody else in that same situation. And so that's kind of like my own, like, personal, recap in a real short period of time. But it's like, I think there's certain things that we may see in our own lives as failures and flaws and mistakes. But if there is something bigger to all this, it can be turned around to use for the good of somebody else. And that's what the purpose of life is. So,
benefiting others. I really feel like having that service that you can provide to other people is something that we get lost in. We don't feel like we need to provide service to others, and we live in this selfishness and stuff, and having that is a big deal. So if you had a magic wand, what changes would you like to make in our legal system?
Oh, geez. That's a huge question. I think we've maybe touched on it a little bit, but man, the hard part, it is so slow. Like, victims don't get justice for years on serious crimes. The juvenile docket is, in theory, you want swift proportional response, because kids don't have this capacity to really understand things a year later, as far as that goes. When you're 15 years old, a year later seems like, a new whole world. You're developing, your mind is, and so, I mean, the system, we say, and you hear that said all the time, it's broken. And, and there's, in a lot of ways, it definitely is. And then in a lot of ways, when I would see the judge be like, give make the bailiff swear to keep the jury separate and do their job. I mean, it's a great system too. Like, there's definitely worse places and worse systems out there. But I like the idea of like, is there a way to make things, facilitate them a little bit quicker? For me, it's like, oftentimes I was, I thought outside the box. I felt, as far as hey, go do 20 hours of community service, come back, show me that you did it, and I'll just dismiss the case. Let's not tie everything up, get you sentenced, do this. And let's just get it done. And so that you don't have to deal with it. You don't have that conviction on your record. And so I think some more creativity would be awesome. I think more, trying to get, the big cases, obviously they're going to take forever. Homicide, armed robbery, those kind of things. But, starting, like you said, starting with somebody's like their first time in there, if you can, like, what I see happen is people get caught up. And like, if any of us live on probation, the probation officer probably is going to find something we're doing wrong anyhow. Like, no matter how good you live your life, nobody can live under strict scrutiny at all times and be, and come out, always doing the right thing. And so, it's a really hard question to say if I had a magic wand, but I think, having a way where we don't, and especially in that younger period, like not only the juvenile court, because there is pretty substantial resources for juveniles, but you hit 18 and now you're being tried as an adult.
Oh yeah.
And so
Yep.
18 to 25 is a period where most indicators say that your brain is still developing.
Yeah.
And so we're treating these individuals as adults. They may not have that, that fully developed brain. And so we're giving felony convictions, lifelong convictions to an individual who's going to, have that from 18 to say 80, however long they live, that just follows them forever. And obviously people can walk out of that, but I don't know. I really wrestled in that kind of that age range. It's like, how do we do this in a way that, somebody who makes a youthful mistake isn't going to have that follow with them? And I think honestly, Colorado has done a few things with sealing records. So I think there's little changes here and there, but I think a lot of the system is good, but it definitely could use an overhaul, especially in the area of like efficiencies and rehabilitation and walking with somebody, giving them those chances and figuring out a way to like capture them out of and live outside of what, maybe has been etched in their life, their entire, childhood or something like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. No joke. That's just I like your walk with them. Like, we need to have that structure for people to maybe have the support to where they're not, they start thinking about things in the way that they're used to. And then they have that checks and balances, the group that gives them the checks and balances, or the person that's like, okay, listen, if you do this and if you continue to do this, this is going to be the result. And let me show you a way to cope with being bored maybe, or, learning how to improve your life and that kind of stuff. What would you like people to do to pay it forward to others?
We've talked about it a lot today. You talk about on your podcast, that relationship you and Larry had, that mentoring relationship.
Yeah.
My dad was really a big proponent of that. And he would mentor, individuals. He's a physician. He'd mentor med students 42 years. He did it essentially every year, multiple individuals. And it's hard. I remember when, community corrections contacted me, and one of the case managers there was like, hey, I've heard you've been spending some time with, some of my clients. And he was kind of perplexed. He's like, for a DA, I mean, to cross over and talk to, I remember one of my trials, I shook the hand of a guy who did it pro se. He was pretty belligerent with the court, pretty out of control and that, but I tried to show him like some compassion and just be like, and kind of calm the situation. I shook his hand afterwards, like, hey, you did a good job. And one of my supervisors like, I can't believe you talked to that guy. It's like, I think we have a perception of like, either you don't talk to him, but there's also, to pay it forward is just, I remember in the community corrections guy, he didn't really ask me about the guys I'd been spending time with. He's like, hey, will you mentor some of our younger guys? We don't have that in our community corrections program. And I'd love to have these guys be able to get outside of this, because especially the younger guys are getting, mentored by older criminals in community corrections. And so, I do love that mentoring, like walking with somebody, kind of bearing the burden, and just, finding a way to, and it's hard because sometimes, I mean, I've been, conned out of money. I've had, sometimes you may get a little disappointed. I've had guys that I felt like, made significant strides and then, maybe overdosed and died. And it's like, but to pay it forward, to just say, hey, I want to be somebody in your life that can kind of point you in the right direction, point you to something bigger, point you to say, hey, you do have value, you do have meaning, you do have a purpose in your life. Let's see if we can help find that together so that, your life can be better. Because like you said, I think that is kind of what we were designed to do.
Yeah.
And when we're not living in that, we start to feel like that impact of that, and start to feel the consequences of not living in that way, and get focused very much in on ourselves, and which that's not what we're designed to do. So yeah, I definitely think like paying it forward. Now you got to be a little cautious. Like if you've never worked in that situation, like for me, that the case manager was like, "Hey, we know but you got to understand what you're getting into, because it can be a situation that not everybody can do. So I don't think everybody should just run out there and try and do like a jail ministry or work with individuals. But everybody has somebody in their life that they can say, "Hey, let's walk together. Let's do this. I've learned this. It may not be exactly the same for you,
Exactly.
but I have, similar, impacts and similar experiences that I would love to be somebody that could be a sounding board for you. And
Exactly.
I think that's something that, especially men, like you were talking about earlier in this podcast, is like, I don't think men are always real open.
No.
I think they've grown up, especially like my father's generation, stuff like that. He was never like super expressive in that. And it's getting better, but I think men in general, just having an individual that say, hey, I experienced this, this is, this. And so what we talked about, like what has happened in my life, one of those questions that Larry asked there is like, that kind of directed me to what I feel like I can help in those situations. But somebody else may have a different experience, and like they've dealt with this, they've had a trauma, and they can be somebody who's going through a similar trauma can relate to. And so I really do think that mentorship relationship is huge. And a lot of the guys that I talk to, that I've mentored, like they're so happy to have that. And there's guys that I've talked to in my psychology class that they just didn't have it growing up. And they're like, that's one thing that's just over and over I hear from in every, aspect is like, I wish I'd had that if they didn't. And the ones that do have it are just so thankful that they do. So if you can pay it forward, if you can have somebody, take advantage of that situation, because you learn a lot mentoring somebody as well.
Yeah, that's the number one. I was telling Larry the other day, it was like, because I talk to a lot of the kids that I work with and kind of help them with their issues and let them know where I've been as a person, what I've done, and where I'm coming out of it now as at 40, and where it's led me, and the decisions that I've made as a youth impacted my future 100%. You may not feel the impact of, the immediate impact of your future, but it's your thought process those decisions bring with you, basically, right? And so just letting them know, like, okay, cool, you're comfortable thinking this way right now, right? But whenever you learn that and you keep building on these thoughts, and next thing you know, these will lead into you having completely negative thought processes whenever you're at 35. And guess what? They're a whole lot harder to overwrite at 35 than they are at 18. And trying to escape that, at an older age is a lot harder than escaping it whenever you're young, and you can learn to make the correct decisions at that point in time. And we're all young, right? We all want to live in the moment and have fun and impress people and all that kind of stuff. But it's one of those things where it's just like, does that really have a benefit to your life overall? If it doesn't, then let's think about something else that's a little bit more positive. But yeah, John, is there anything else that you want to add to our discussion today, my man?
Well, we've covered a lot of topics. So I think, like if you're in the criminal justice, looking at your audience and some younger individuals, I just kind of walking through that in a situation. If you've been charged with a crime, that obviously work with your defense attorneys and stuff like that, because you have certain rights, you have certain things that can really, but there is also there is an element of help there. And so I think sometimes we don't, like you were saying, you get nervous if you're going to get pulled over. But if you get on the sentence side and you're on probation, a lot of those probation officers are there to help you. They want to help you. They want to walk with you in that situation to the extent they can. It's not going to be a mentor situation.
No.
But just, being willing to say, hey, I need help. And I think that's a big one. It's like, hey, I can't do it on my own. What can I do? And then, for those that have the capacity who maybe walk through some stuff, be willing to go out there and mentor somebody and be that person that person that kind of support that person. But, I think, just because, you've either committed a crime, been convicted of a crime, or that doesn't have to be your identity.
No.
That doesn't have to be who you are. It doesn't have to be how you see yourself, how you walk through the world. You can walk through the world in a different way. And, I just know that there are people out there that are wanting to help, and, be willing to say, hey, I need that help, and, do it in ways that, that there are people that will help, and be willing to trust that, be willing to take that step, that leap of faith. It's like, okay, I know what I know. and taking that step into the unknown is scary because you don't know it. But it's going to be like, for me, it's like, I can't keep living this way. So I got to trust in something else. And
exactly.
So that's where I think it is, taking that leap of faith, taking that trust step,
being comfortable in the unknown. Yeah. That's one thing I struggle with, is being comfortable in the unknown. You know, that's life. And the saying that I always repeat to myself, whenever I'm finding that discomfort in the unknown, is there's one thing that I do know, and that I know nothing, you know. So it's you know, so let's just go, let's live this life and experience, and at the same time, remember my behaviors and my actions have a consequence to them. And do I want to see that consequence as a positive impact on my life and on other people's lives, or do I want to see that consequence as something that I have to be afraid of turning the corner with? And is it going to be something that's going to maybe haunt me? Or if I get caught for this, is it going to be something that's going to get me into severe trouble? Or how are other people going to view me as a person? All that kind of stuff, right? So just remembering we're all in this together as people, and we're all on this earth together to serve each other and bring positiveness to each other is a big deal. But heck yeah, my man.
Definitely.
I think I'm gonna we have barely touched an iceberg here, John. I feel like, you know. It's one of those things where I really feel like I want to bring you on with Larry again, whenever Larry has the ability to come be on the show with us, because his insight I greatly appreciate. And what I love about him is he's a big listener, you know, and it is a big absorber. And that's for sure. So we'll definitely have you on again. And in the meantime, I'm Nick. This has been the Love Truth Leadership podcast. Like I said, Larry's sorry he couldn't be here, but he sends his best. And as Larry always likes to say, have a grateful day.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you for being here with us. A huge thank you to John England for today's enlightening conversation. It truly reflects what Love Truth Leadership is all about. Next episode, I'll be taking a personal turn, sharing my own struggles with self-change. It's a real raw journey, and I'm right in the thick of it. Join me as we explore the ups and downs of personal growth. Until then, keep embracing your path with strength and honesty. This is Nick signing off. Catch you in the next episode, and remember, leadership is not just a title, but the profound expression of the love and truth we bring into the world. Thanks for listening.